The fiancé tried to slap the billionaire's ex at the gala. Then the maid's toddler grabbed her wrist. Everything she told him was a lie. Even her name. She walked into his life carrying a single suitcase, a borrowed smile, and a story she had rehearsed so many times it had started to feel real, even to her. He believed her because he wanted to. Because grief does that to a man. It makes him reach for the first warm thing that feels like home. But someone in that house already knew the truth. Not him. Not his lawyers. Not the security team that vetted every employee with military precision. Child. 3 years old. Barely speaking in full sentences. And yet she knew. Had always known. In the way that small children know things adults have spent years burying beneath marble floors and designer gowns and carefully worded prenuptial agreements. The lie had been living inside that house for months. Breathing the same air. Sitting at the same table. Watching. And the night it finally unraveled wasn't quiet. It happened in front of 400 people, under crystal chandeliers, at the most photographed gala of the year, when a child's tiny hand reached out and stopped everything. By the end of this story, you'll question everything you thought you knew. Welcome back. If you're new here, you walked in at exactly the right moment. What you're about to hear is one of those stories that doesn't reveal itself all at once. Peels. Layer by layer. And every time you think you've figured it out, something shifts beneath your feet. Drop your theory in the comments as we go. I want to see who figures it out first. Because this one fooled almost everyone. New mysteries every week. Subscribe before the next one drops. You won't want to miss what's coming. Let's begin. Dominic Ashford was, by every visible measure, a man who had rebuilt himself from ruin. At 32, he controlled a private equity firm worth just over $4 billion, owned 3 residences across 2 continents, and was, according to the business press, the most disciplined mind in alternative investments. Discipline was the word people always used for Dominic. Not brilliant. Not visionary. Disciplined. As if the most remarkable thing about him was the iron wall he had constructed around every feeling he'd ever had. 18 months ago, his marriage had ended. Quietly. No press release. No Instagram announcement. Just a filing, a settlement, and the sudden total disappearance of Elena Ashford from every public surface of his life. Photographs removed. Her name scrubbed from foundation donor lists. Her seat at the annual gala, the seat she had occupied for 3 consecutive years, left empty, then quietly reassigned to a floral centerpiece so grand it almost distracted from the gap. Almost. People noticed. People always notice the thing that is trying very hard not to be noticed. But Dominic had moved on, or so the story went. Her name was Cassandra Vole. 27. A corporate events consultant with a portfolio that included 3 international galas, 2 product launches for Fortune 100 companies, and 1 very well-placed introduction through a mutual colleague at a charity dinner in Geneva. She was warm without being soft. Elegant without trying. She laughed at the right moments and stayed silent at the right ones. She made Dominic feel, for the first time in what felt like decades, that silence could be companionable rather than punishing. He proposed after 8 months. The ring was a cushion-cut diamond, 3.4 carats, set in platinum. Custom. He had designed it himself, a detail Cassandra told everyone, always touching her left hand just slightly when she said it, as if the ring still surprised her. The engagement was announced in the society column of a broadsheet. A small photograph. Cassandra looking radiant. Dominic looking like Dominic. Reserved. Correct. Present in body but always slightly withheld, as if some essential part of him was still standing in a room no one else had access to. The gala had been Cassandra's idea. The Ashford Charitable Foundation hosted it every year, a black-tie evening at the Grand Meridian Hotel, raising funds for children's literacy initiatives across 3 countries. Dominic attended out of obligation. Cassandra attended out of something that looked like joy but had a very different engine beneath it. She had spent 6 weeks planning her appearance. The dress, an ivory column gown with a structured shoulder, had been made to measure by an atelier in Paris. Her hair was arranged by a stylist who flew in from Milan. The look was deliberate, something between angel and armor. She wanted to walk into that room and be impossible to ignore. She succeeded. What she hadn't planned was the maid's child. Dominic's household staff had been with him for years. Mrs. Okafor ran the main residence with the quiet authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to raise her voice. The gardening team rotated seasonally. The driver, Terence, had worked for Dominic since the early days of the firm, before the billions, when the car was a used Volvo and the office was a leased room above a sandwich shop. And then there was Rosa. Rosa Mendez had been hired 14 months ago as a live-in housekeeper, a modest title for a role that had quietly expanded to include managing the household calendar, coordinating with caterers, and serving as the informal emotional center of the residence, a function no job description had ever captured. She was quiet, efficient, and careful in the specific way that people are careful when they have learned, through hard experience, that carelessness has consequences. She had a daughter, Lily, 3 years old, dark curls, eyes the color of deep water. She spent her days in the small apartment attached to the east wing of the residence, supervised by Rosa during work hours, often playing in the kitchen while Rosa prepared staff meals. She was, by all accounts, an unusually still child, not unhappy but watchful. The kind of child who sits in the corner of a room and takes in everything without demanding to be noticed. Dominic had met Lily exactly 3 times in passing in the hallway. He'd smiled at her. She'd stared at him. He hadn't thought about it again. The night of the gala, Lily was not supposed to be there. Rosa had arranged for a babysitter, the teenage daughter of a neighbor who'd watched Lily twice before. But the babysitter had cancelled that afternoon, a family emergency, and Rosa had no backup, and the gala setup required her physical presence at the hotel until 9 p.m. So Lily came, wrapped in a small wool coat, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear longer than the other. She was tucked into a quiet antechamber off the main ballroom with a coloring book and a cup of apple juice. She wasn't supposed to be seen. But children have a way of appearing exactly where they are least expected. Breadcrumb. Lily is described as watchful. She has been observing something in that house far longer than anyone realizes. Red herring. The detail about Elena's name being scrubbed from public life seems to suggest Dominic is the one hiding something about his ex-wife. The viewer is led to believe he is the architect of the deception. Theory activation question. Why does a toddler who barely speaks in full sentences feel, somehow, like the most important person in this story? Sensory detail. The stuffed rabbit with one ear longer than the other. A toy that has been held so many times it has worn unevenly. Someone has been holding it in moments of fear. Dialogue exchange. That evening, as Rosa buttoned Lily's coat, the child looked up and said very quietly, "Is she going to be there?" Rosa's hand stilled on the top button. Just for a moment. "Who, baby?" Lily didn't answer. She just tucked her rabbit under her arm and walked to the door. After the twist, you will understand exactly who Lily was asking about, and why Rosa's hands stopped. 400 guests. 3 courses. A string quartet playing Debussy in the corner with the quiet desperation of musicians who know no one is listening. Cassandra moved through the room like a current, purposeful, warm, always arriving exactly where she needed to be. She kissed cheeks. She laughed at the right moments. She rested her hand on Dominic's arm with the precise frequency of someone who wanted the gesture to look natural without having practiced it too many times. She was extraordinary at it. Yet, Dominic noticed, somewhere between the appetizer and the second glass of champagne, that Cassandra kept glancing toward the entrance. Not casually. Not the way you glance at a door because a sound caught your attention. Specifically. With the focused attention of someone waiting for a particular arrival. He didn't mention it. That was Dominic's great flaw, and he knew it, and had never managed to correct it. He noticed things and chose not to speak them aloud, storing them instead in a private internal filing system that no one else had access to. His therapist, during the brief period he'd seen one after the divorce, had called it strategic emotional withholding. Dominic had thanked her for the diagnosis and never gone back. The entrance opened, and Cassandra went very, very still. She didn't freeze dramatically. She didn't gasp. She simply paused. A fraction of a second. The way a piece of music pauses between movements, just long enough to change the air in the room. Dominic followed her eyeline. Lena. His ex-wife stood at the entrance in a deep burgundy dress, her dark hair arranged simply, without fuss, in a way that managed to be both understated and impossible to look away from. She was 28 years old and carried herself with the specific composure of someone who has decided, after a period of considerable pain, to walk back into a room that once hurt them, not to reclaim it, but to prove they could. She had been invited. That was the detail that didn't fit. Dominic had not invited her. He had assumed after the way things had ended, cleanly, legally, without screaming but with a very particular kind of silence that was worse than screaming, that Elena would not attend, that she would spare them both. But someone had sent her an invitation. He found out later, much later, that the invitation had gone out under the foundation's name, on official stationery, signed by the events coordinator. The events coordinator whose role had been managed, for the past 3 months, by Cassandra. He stored that detail in the filing system. Said nothing. What he saw in the next 90 seconds disturbed him in a way he could not immediately name. Cassandra crossed the room toward Elena. Not to avoid her, toward her. With a smile that was shaped correctly but powered by something else entirely. Dominic watched his fiancée approach his ex-wife and felt the specific unease of a man watching two people interact who should not know each other well enough to produce this particular quality of tension. Elena saw Cassandra coming. She did not smile. She did not retreat. She simply stood very still and waited, the way you wait for something you have been expecting for a long time. They were close enough now to speak quietly. Dominic, 20 feet away, could not hear the words. But he could read the architecture of the exchange, the tight angle of Cassandra's shoulders, the careful neutrality on Elena's face, the moment when Cassandra leaned in slightly and said something that made Elena's eyes sharpen. Not with surprise. With recognition. Breadcrumb. Elena was expecting this confrontation. She doesn't react with surprise, only recognition. She came to the gala knowing what would happen. Red herring. The viewer is now primed to suspect that Elena is the antagonist. She's crashed a gala, she seems to be engaging with the fiancé provocatively. Everything points toward Elena being the problem. Theory activation question. Why would Cassandra, a woman with everything to gain from a smooth evening, deliberately seek out the one person most likely to destabilize it? Sensory detail. The burgundy dress. The color of something spilled that doesn't wash out. Dialogue exchange. Later, when Dominic asked Cassandra what they had talked about, she smiled and said, "Old friends catching up. You know how it is." Elena, asked the same question in a separate conversation weeks later, said something different. She wanted me to know she'd won. I wanted her to know the game wasn't over. The same exchange. Two completely different accounts of who said what. By layer 4 you'll know why. Rosa saw it differently. She wasn't supposed to be watching. She was supposed to be in the catering anteroom, coordinating with the kitchen staff about the dessert service. Her daughter tucked safely in the side chamber with her coloring book and rabbit. But something had pulled her to the edge of the ballroom. Call it instinct. Call it the particular vigilance of a woman who has learned that the moments that look calm are sometimes the most dangerous. She had been in Dominic's employ for 14 months. In that time, she had learned the geography of his life with the thoroughness of someone who cleans a space intimately. Who knows which drawers stick, which mirrors have scratches in the lower left corner, which rooms smell different depending on the season. She knew that Dominic never ate breakfast before 9. She knew that he kept a photograph in his nightstand drawer. Face down, always face down, that he had never moved but clearly hadn't been able to discard. She knew that he talked quietly to himself when he was working through a difficult problem. Not words exactly, more a low hum that meant the machinery inside him was running hard. She also knew things about Cassandra that Cassandra did not know she knew. Rosa was invisible in the way that service workers are made invisible. Not through cruelty exactly, but through a social contract that treats certain people as furniture. Present, functional, and unobserving. People say things in front of staff they would never say in front of peers. They make calls. They leave documents open. They have conversations in rooms they forget are not empty. Rosa had heard things. She had heard Cassandra 3 months ago in the library, speaking on the phone in a lowered voice. Rosa had been dusting the hallway outside, a task that takes longer than it appears to when the door is slightly ajar. She had heard a name she recognized. A name she had heard before, in a different context, attached to a different story. She hadn't been certain. Not then. But tonight, watching Cassandra cross the ballroom toward Elena with that particular quality of purpose, Rosa became certain. The two women were not strangers. She had suspected it since the phone call. She had confirmed it 3 weeks later when she found, tucked inside a jacket pocket she was preparing for the dry cleaner, a folded note. Handwritten. 4 sentences. She had read it twice before placing it back exactly as she found it. Her expression giving nothing away. The way it gave nothing away when she found the second burner phone in the drawer of the dressing room, beneath a stack of cashmere. She had said nothing. Because Rosa understood something that most people in her position spend their lives learning. Information is not power until you know the right moment to use it. And the right moment had not yet arrived. But she had started watching more carefully. She had started noticing, in particular, the way Cassandra behaved around Lily. Most people, even people who don't especially like children, develop a kind of unconscious warmth toward a 3-year-old. They soften slightly. Their voice drops a register. They make eye contact with a small person in the room in the involuntary way that humans acknowledge other humans. Cassandra had never once made eye contact with Lily. Not avoidance exactly. Not hostility. Something more calculated. A deliberate non-acknowledgement, the way you don't acknowledge a security camera. Not because you've forgotten it's there, but because looking at it would confirm that you know it is. Lily, for her part, had noticed. Children notice the people who pretend not to see them far more acutely than they notice the people who ignore them out of distraction. Indifference is one thing. This was something else, and Lily, 3 years old, one-eared rabbit, coloring books, had been watching Cassandra with the fixed, unblinking attention of a small person who has already made up her mind about something. Tonight, Rosa watched from the edge of the ballroom as Cassandra leaned in toward Elena and said whatever she said. Watched Elena's face. Watched Cassandra pull back. Watched the moment, quick, controlled, over before anyone else registered it, when Cassandra raised her hand. Not a wave. A motion that was moving toward Elena's face. Rosa was already walking forward before she knew she had decided to move. She was not going to make it in time. And then Lily appeared. Breadcrumb. The burner phone and the handwritten note. Rosa found them. She has evidence. She has been waiting for the right moment. Red herring. Rosa's protectiveness seems entirely maternal. We are meant to assume she's moving to protect Elena from Cassandra out of basic human decency. We are not yet meant to understand the real reason she knows Elena. Theory activation question. What does Rosa know that has kept her silent for 14 months? And what does Lily know that Rosa doesn't? Sensory detail. The jacket pocket. The note folded 4 times. The way Rosa's hands didn't shake when she put it back. Dialogue exchange. Once in the kitchen, Lily had looked up from her drawing and said, without preamble, "That lady smells wrong." Rosa had looked up. "Which lady, Mija?" Lily had pointed toward the hallway, toward the part of the house where Cassandra had just walked through. The one who pretends. Rosa had gone very still. Then she had set down her spoon and said quietly, carefully, "What does she pretend?" But Lily had already gone back to her drawing. After layer 4, you will understand why Rosa asked that question with that much urgency. Lily's hand came out of nowhere. She had escaped the side chamber, crept past the distracted door, padding in her small shoes across the edge of the ballroom, navigating between the legs of 400 people with a particular invisibility of small children in adult spaces. She had been following Rosa. Or following something. Some internal compass that pointed her, unerringly, across that vast gilded room, through the clusters of champagne glasses and evening wear and carefully maintained social fictions, to the exact moment that needed her most. Cassandra's hand was rising. 400 people. Not one of them looking at the right spot. And Lily's small fingers, 3 years old stuffed rabbit abandoned somewhere on the marble behind her, closed around Cassandra's wrist. The contact stopped everything. Not because a 3-year-old is physically capable of restraining an adult woman. She isn't. Cassandra could have pulled free in an instant. But she didn't. Because the moment she looked down, the moment she saw whose hand was holding her wrist, something happened to her face. Something that had nothing to do with surprise. It was older than surprise. Deeper. The expression of a person confronting something they had spent enormous energy trying to ensure would never happen. She looked at Lily. Lily looked back. And then Lily said, in a voice that was clear and small and absolutely certain, a single word. "Mama." The word landed in the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward invisibly, touching everyone who was close enough to hear, changing the surface of everything. Dominic heard it from 20 feet away. He stood completely still for a moment that felt architectural, load-bearing, the way certain seconds carry the weight of everything built on top of them. And then the entire structure of the past 14 months rearranged itself. Because here is the truth of layer 4, the fact that reframes everything you have read from the beginning. Rosa Mendez was not the maid. She was not the housekeeper. She was not the live-in staff member who had been hired 14 months ago through an agency. She was Dominic's ex-wife. She was Elena. The real Elena. The woman who had appeared tonight in the burgundy dress, who Dominic had believed for 18 months was his former wife, was not Elena Voss Ashford. She was a woman named Mara Solano, a former colleague and the closest friend of the real Elena, who had spent the last year and a half living the life that Elena had been pushed out of. The real Elena had not disappeared after the divorce. She had hidden. Not because she was weak. Not because she had been defeated. Because she had discovered in the final months of her marriage something about the woman who had been systematically dismantling her life from the inside. Something serious enough that leaving openly was dangerous. Something that required her to vanish completely, reinvent herself, and place herself exactly where she could watch and wait and collect the evidence she needed. She had become Rosa. She had dyed her hair, worn different clothes, adapted her accent. She was trilingual. It hadn't been difficult. The job application had been legitimate, routed through a staffing agency that didn't cross-reference photographs. Dominic had vetted her background, not her face. He'd never imagined his ex-wife would apply to clean his house. She had spent 14 months inside his home, invisible, watching the woman who had destroyed her marriage operate with total impunity. And Lily. Lily was her daughter. Dominic's daughter. The child he had been told, by lawyers and documents and carefully constructed legal fictions, did not exist. Breadcrumb. The face-down photograph in the nightstand. Dominic couldn't look at it. He also couldn't let it go. He already knew, somewhere beneath his discipline, that something wasn't right. Red herring. Everything about Elena in the burgundy dress was designed, by Cassandra, to be convincing enough that the real Elena would be permanently replaced in everyone's memory. Theory activation question. Pause here. Go back to layer 1 and read the line about the maid's dark curls and eyes the color of deep water. Now look at what the story tells us about Dominic. What do you see? Sensory detail. The rabbit with one ear longer than the other. It had been held too long. By a child who needed comfort. In a life that was supposed to be temporary but kept extending. Dialogue exchange. In layer 1, Rosa tells Lily, "Who, baby?" when the child asks if she will be there. Now you know that Rosa knew exactly who Lily was asking about. She was asking about the woman who had taken her father. The woman who had made her mother disappear. Rosa's hands had stopped on that button because she was trying to decide, again one more time, if tonight was finally the night she let the truth out. Dominic did not react the way a man reacts when he doesn't understand something. He reacted the way a man reacts when he has just been handed the key to a room he has been standing outside for a very long time. He crossed the ballroom in silence. 400 guests continued their conversations, their laughter, their performance of ease. The string quartet moved into something that might have been Ravel. Cassandra had stepped back from Lily's hand, from Elena's hand, and was recalibrating with the speed of someone who has rehearsed contingencies. Dominic did not look at Cassandra. He looked at Rosa. He looked at her for a long moment, the way you look at something you are trying to see differently, trying to find the shape of the thing beneath the shape you thought you knew. The different hair. The different posture. But not different enough, now that he was looking, now that Lily's word had cracked the lens through which he'd been seeing everything. Her eyes. He had never looked at Rosa's eyes. Not really. She was staff. She moved through his home with the invisible efficiency of someone who had mastered the art of being unseen. And he had permitted that invisibility because it was convenient and because looking at the people who maintained his life would have required him to reckon with the life he was actually living. He looked now. He knew those eyes. "Elena," he said. It wasn't a question. It came out quiet, almost conversational, the way you say the name of something you've been trying to remember, relieved and stricken simultaneously. Rosa, Elena, held his gaze. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She said simply and completely, "Lily needs to know you." Not, "I needed to see you." Not, "I had to come back." Not anything about herself at all. Just that. The essential fact. The reason she had spent 14 months cleaning his floors and managing his calendar and watching the woman who had stolen her life operate from the inside. Lily needs to know you. Dominic looked down at his daughter. 3 years old. The rabbit retrieved from somewhere behind her, tucked back under her arm. Looking up at him with eyes that were, unmistakably, his own eyes. He crouched down to her level. She studied him with the thoroughness of a small scientist examining an unfamiliar specimen. Then she said, "You're tall." And somewhere inside the iron wall Dominic Ashford had spent 32 years constructing around every feeling he'd ever had, something gave way. Meanwhile, Cassandra was working. She had moved to the perimeter of the ballroom with the controlled efficiency of someone executing a contingency plan that had always been there, dormant, waiting for the possibility of exactly this failure. She was on her phone. Her voice was low, her expression pleasant, because in a room full of 400 witnesses you wear your expression like a costume and you do not let it slip. Dominic's security chief, Marcus, spotted her first. He had been watching the evening with professional attention, and something about the quality of Cassandra's focus, the speed of her fingers on the screen, the angle of her body toward the exit, activated an instinct that 12 years in private security had sharpened to a very fine edge. He moved toward her. She saw him coming. He changed trajectory. She did not leave. She couldn't leave. Leaving would be a statement. Instead, she pivoted back into the room, reclaimed her champagne glass from a passing tray, and rejoined a conversation with 2 board members with a smile so seamless it should have been alarming. But Marcus was already at her table. He was looking at what she had left behind. Her evening bag, abandoned in the brief moment of her retreat. Every silk clasp. He didn't open it. He noted its presence. He noted the phone she was still holding. He noted the number she'd called, visible for 2 seconds on the screen before she locked it, and recognized it. Not the number itself, but the format. A specific international prefix. A country where Cassandra Vole had no disclosed connections, no clients, no professional history. He sent Dominic a text. Dominic read it in the crouched position, Lily still examining him with scientific rigor. He looked up at Elena. "How long have you known?" he asked. 14 months, she said. "From the day I walked into this job." "What did you find?" She looked at him steadily. "Enough." Breadcrumb. Marcus's observation of the phone prefix. This international connection is the thread that unravels everything about Cassandra's real purpose. Red herring. The viewer might now assume Cassandra's scheme was purely romantic, that she pursued Dominic for love or money, the classic narrative. The international phone prefix suggests the scale is much larger. Theory activation question. Who was Cassandra calling? And what was she afraid of Marcus finding in that evening bag? Sensory detail. Lily's rabbit retrieved and retucked. She had dropped it somewhere in her crossing of that ballroom. She had walked through 400 people without it. She had been brave enough to do that. For this moment. Dialogue exchange. When Dominic asked, "How long have you known?" and Elena answered, 14 months. Understand that she is not counting from when she discovered what Cassandra was. She is counting from the day she arrived in his house and confirmed what she had already known from the outside. She had known before she came. She came because knowing wasn't enough. Mara Solano, the woman in the burgundy dress, the woman everyone in this room believed was Elena Ashford, had not come to the gala to cause trouble. She had come because Elena had asked her to. This was the piece of the architecture that no one, including Dominic, had fully grasped yet. Because the story everyone had been telling themselves, the story of the ex-wife returning to haunt the new engagement, of old wounds reopened on a gala night, was a performance. Designed and directed by Elena from inside the house, executed by Mara from the outside. The invitation that had gone out under the foundation's name. Cassandra hadn't managed that alone. The events coordination software that Cassandra controlled also had a secondary access credential. One she didn't know existed because Elena had created it quietly, in the early weeks of the job, during the window when new employees are given system orientation and no one watches closely what they explore. Elena had sent the invitation herself. She had invited Mara, as herself as Elena, because she needed Cassandra to see her ex-husband's ex-wife walk into the room. She needed to observe what Cassandra did when that happened. She needed to watch the tells. And they had been extraordinary. Every response Cassandra had made in the past 2 hours, the stillness at the entrance, the calculated crossing of the ballroom, the quiet confrontation, the rising hand, had been observed, logged internally, and added to a file that Elena had been building for 14 months with the methodical patience of someone who understands that the moment you deploy evidence is as important as the evidence itself. But the secondary reveal, the piece that changed even Elena's understanding of the situation, was what Marcus found in the evening bag. He had called for Dominic's legal counsel before opening it. Protocol. The counsel arrived within 4 minutes. He had been at the gala, as he was every year, a fixture in the 3rd row of tables near the window. Within the bag, the phone, the personal items, the small tools of an elegant evening. And beneath the inner lining, accessed by a seam that had been professionally altered, a USB drive. Unmarked. The kind of object that is easy to dismiss and very difficult to explain. Marcus handed it to legal counsel. Legal counsel looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Elena. Elena said, "I know what's on it." She had found the drive's contents 3 months ago. Not the physical drive, but the digital files, accessed through the secondary credential she'd created. She had documented everything. She had copies. She had, because she was Elena Voss Ashford and had spent 8 years watching the way powerful people operated, also ensured that those copies existed in 3 separate locations, accessible to 2 separate people, neither of whom was in this building. What was on the drive was not a love affair. It was not blackmail material against Dominic, or compromising photographs, or the ordinary debris of a secret life. It was a corporate intelligence file. Cassandra Vole, whose real name was Cassandra Mertens, which was itself a middle name used as a working alias, had been placed inside Dominic's life by a competitor firm. One that had spent 4 years trying to acquire a specific portfolio of assets that Dominic's fund controlled. The romantic relationship had been engineered from the introduction in Geneva, managed with the precision of a long operation, and designed to culminate in a marriage that would give Cassandra access to the legal structures, the prenuptial agreement, the joint filings, the beneficiary arrangements, through which proprietary investment strategies could be legally extracted. The woman Dominic had proposed to after 8 months was a corporate spy. The engagement ring, 3.4 carats, cushion cut, custom, designed by him personally, was a vehicle. A piece of documented personal sentiment meant to accelerate the timeline to signatures. Elena had known this for 3 months. She had waited not because she was uncertain, but because she needed one final piece. The drive. Physical evidence, not just digital copies. Something that couldn't be dismissed as a fabrication. Mara had been instructed. Walk into the room, be visible, observe Cassandra's response. Because Elena knew that if Cassandra believed Elena Ashford had returned, publicly, visibly, as a potential complication to the engagement, she would move. She would accelerate. She might reach for the insurance she'd been keeping beneath the lining of an evening bag. She did. Breadcrumb. The secondary access credential created in the first weeks of employment. This is the thread. Elena had been building her case from the first day. Red herring. For 3 layers, the viewer has been building a theory about romantic betrayal, about a jealous ex-wife, about a love triangle. The story was never about love at all. It was always about power and money. Theory activation question. Knowing now that Cassandra was a planted operative, go back to layer 2 and read the description of how she moved through the gala. Does it read differently? Does it read like someone enjoying a party, or like someone running a mission? Sensory detail, the evening bag, every silk, the kind of object designed to look expensive and impermanent, the kind of object nobody looks inside of. The seam altered professionally. Someone had done this work. The bag had been prepared before the gala. Dialogue exchange. In layer 1, Cassandra is described as someone who made Dominic feel, for the first time in what felt like decades, that silence could be companionable rather than punishing. That silence. That companionable silence. It was the silence of someone who had nothing to confess, because she felt nothing, because the warmth was manufactured, because the engineered intimacy of 8 months had been a project, managed with professional discipline, by a woman who knew exactly which buttons to press in a man who had been told, by enough people for long enough, that he was too closed off to be loved easily. She had found the seam, and she had used it. But there was one more layer. The thing Elena had not told anyone. Not Mara. Not Marcus. Not the legal counsel who would, in the coming weeks, build the case that dismantled Cassandra Mertens and traced the corporate intelligence operation back to its source. One truth that was hers alone. That she had carried for 14 months through every act of this long, patient, exhausting performance. She had not come back for Dominic. She had not come back for justice. She had come back because of the photograph in the nightstand drawer. 3 months into her employment, during a standard room cleaning, she had found it. Face down, always face down. She had picked it up, something she would not normally do. Something that crossed a line of professional boundary she had carefully maintained, and turned it over. It was a photograph of Lily. Not taken during the 14 months Elena had been in the house. Not recent. The photograph was older. Printed, not digital, the quality of something developed from film, which nobody did anymore unless the moment was too important for a screen. Lily at approximately 18 months. In a park she didn't recognize. In clothes she had dressed Lily in, that she remembered specifically, the tiny yellow jacket, the small boots, on a day that had happened before everything had fallen apart. Dominic had a photograph of his daughter. A photograph taken before he had been told the child didn't exist. Which meant he had known, or suspected, or had been told something different than what the documents said. Which meant the story of the divorce, the story Elena had been told by her own lawyers, the story of a clean separation, no children recorded, no custody because there was no custody to arrange, was not, in its entirety, the story that had actually been told to Dominic. She had spent 2 months processing this before she could act on it. Because the question it raised was devastating in its implications. Had Dominic been deceived too? Not as much as she had been. Not in the same ways. But enough. Cassandra Merton's operation had required Dominic to believe that the divorce had been Elena's choice. That she had walked away cleanly, settled quickly, wanted nothing. It had required in the years since, that he carry a specific kind of grief that was actually a specific kind of guilt. The guilt of a man who believed his wife had chosen to leave rather than stay and fight for the marriage. Cassandra had manufactured that guilt. Had maintained it. Had been the compassionate presence that appeared 18 months later to gently, warmly suggest that maybe he deserved to stop punishing himself. He had been groomed by his own grief. Elena had needed to know this with certainty before she could decide what she wanted the end of this story to look like. Because the end of this story, the version she controlled, the version she had spent 14 months engineering, had 2 possible forms. In the first version she left. She deployed the evidence, protected Dominic's firm, secured legal recognition of Lily's parentage, and walked away. She had never needed him to know she was Rosa. She could have submitted the evidence anonymously. She hadn't had to be here. In the second version, the version she had been choosing incrementally, over 14 months of mornings in his kitchen and evenings watching his lights go off from the East Wing, she stayed. Not as Rosa, as herself. As someone whose story had been altered without her consent, who had come back to reclaim it, and who had discovered, in the process of reclaiming it, that the man she had married was not the man she had been told had let her go. He had not let her go. He had been told she was already gone. Tonight in the grand ballroom, after the security team had quietly escorted Cassandra Mertens to a side room where legal counsel and, within the hour, federal authorities would join them, after Mara had been briefed and had squeezed Elena's hand and slipped away with her burgundy dress and her years of patient loyalty, after Marcus had secured the drive and the communications it contained. After all of that, Dominic found Elena standing near the window with Lily asleep against her shoulder, the rabbit with the uneven ear tucked between them, Lily's small hand still holding a fistful of her mother's hair in sleep, the way children hold the thing they are most afraid of losing. He stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there. The way you stand next to something you have missed for so long that proximity itself is almost too much to absorb. After a long time, he said, "The photograph. In the drawer. Someone sent it to me. 2 years ago. I never found out who." Elena looked at him. "That was Mara," she said. "She wanted you to know she existed. Before I knew how bad it had gotten. Before I knew how to come back." He was quiet for a moment. "I kept it face down," he said. "Because every time I looked at it, I felt like something was wrong with the story I'd been told. And I didn't know how to ask the question without the whole story falling apart," Elena finished. "Yes." Lily stirred slightly against Elena's shoulder, opened her eyes, looked at Dominic with the considering expression of a person who has already made up their mind but wants one more piece of data before they commit. Then she held out her rabbit. An offering. An assessment passed. An invitation extended. From the smallest person in the room to the tallest, in the language of 3-year-olds, which is always the most honest language in any room. Dominic took the rabbit. Held it with the careful gravity of someone who understands that certain objects carry the full weight of what they represent. And for the first time in a very long time, the filing system inside him, the private internal archive where he stored everything he had noticed and chosen not to say, released something. Not neatly. Not without cost. But completely. The story is over. But the truth, the real truth, was there from the very first sentence. Everything she told him was a lie. Even her name. We told you that was about Cassandra. We let you believe it for 7 layers. But go back. Read that line again, and read it about Rosa. About the woman who had taken a false name, constructed a false identity, entered a false role, not to deceive him, but to find her way back to him through the only door that was still open. She lied about everything, including her name. And the lie was the most honest thing she ever did. The breadcrumbs were planted from the very beginning. Lily asking, is she going to be there? Before the gala. Rosa's hand stilling on that button. The rabbit held too long by a child living a temporary life that kept extending. The face-down photograph that a man with a filing system full of unasked questions couldn't look at and couldn't throw away. The story didn't fool you because it was clever. It fooled you because it told you exactly what was happening, and then gave you a more convenient explanation. And you, like all of us, chose the more convenient explanation. Did you figure it out? Or did the story fool you completely? Drop your answer in the comments. When did you first suspect Rosa was Elena? Was it the rabbit? The silence at the button? Lily's stare at Cassandra? Or did layer 4 completely blindside you? Tell me the moment the penny dropped. If this story kept you watching, hit the like button. Not for the algorithm. For the little girl who crossed a ballroom full of strangers to grab the right wrist at the right moment. She deserves it. Subscribe now because the next story is already built, and the twist in that one lives in layer 1. You'll walk right past it. Everyone does. The next story has a bigger secret. And unlike this one, the liar isn't who you think. You there.